Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Poets in Pajamas reading series. We'll get started with this reading in a few minutes. We'll get started in just a minute. Great. Okay, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Poets in Pajamas reading. My name is Meg Eden. I teach creative writing at Anne Arundel Community College. I write young adult fiction and then have the novel Post-High School Reality Quest out. I also write poetry, and I'm excited that my debut collection, Drowning in the Floating World, is coming out in March. I want to encourage you guys for this time. I'm going to be reading for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to be answering questions. I welcome you to type questions in the chat at any time if you'd like. And if you've got any that you're thinking about, feel free to throw them in now. So for our time today, I wanted to read from my upcoming collection, Drowning in the Floating World, which is about the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and Fukushima power plant disaster. Well, that's really where it started. The large amount of it is there, but it also explores Japanese mythology at large and its idea of water, how water is manifest through their mythology, through creatures like yokai, how it's connected to life and death. The word for water is mizu, is in so many different parts of Japanese life, and I became very interested in that sense of water, that something like a tsunami can completely destroy and water can be obliterate, but it can also heal, it can also produce life. So those were some of the things that really interested me in this collection. So I'd like to start with in the disaster. It's broken up, or at least originally this was broken up into different sections of different worlds. So as the title is Drowning in the Floating World, there was the drowning world with the disaster in water. There was the nuclear world with the power plant disaster, and then the floating world, which is this idea, I think I'll get into a little bit more, but in short, it's this idea from the Edo period of it was when the middle class had a lot more money, and there was this rise of pleasure, there was this rise of brief pleasure, and I guess the idea of floating and drowning, that duality really interested me. So I'll get started with a poem towards the beginning called Things to Do in My Hometown, Higashi Matsushima. This is after Gary Schneider. Become a spirit and wander as a lantern through a nostalgic alleyway. Thrift shop in the ruins of a mall. Make miso out of seaweed from a backyard. Make udon from the debris in a living room. Try to remember friends' names and what they looked like before they were found. Watch the water recede. Watch someone at the top of the hill build what looks like a shed for a dog. Imagine living in a dog's house. Imagine being a dog living in a neighbor's house. Make a list of places to move to. Go through the house and find what has and has not been affected. Is the milk still good? The natto? Make a map of where all the buildings used to be. Go to the woods to find something living. Go find a fox. Ask how many tails it takes to outsmart disaster. Tell the fox what it means to be a survivor, and watch the fox tend to its young. Think about what it's like to be the tsunami, filling the earth, subduing it, to be fruitful and multiply, 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 dominion over fish, birds, and over every living thing that moves about the earth. Another component that really interested me was the intersection of how disaster can bring out the mythology, the folklore, the surreal. And I was reading a lot of stories about people who, in the wake of the disaster, were returning to kind of these mythological roots and seeing the dead, having superstitions about entering areas that were affected by disaster, afraid of catching ghosts, things like that. So in response to that, I wrote this poem, Tohoku Ghost Stories. It starts with a quote from Masashi Hijikata. We remembered the old ghost stories, and we told one another that there would be many new stories like that. Personally, I don't believe in the existence of spirits, but that's not the point. If people say they see ghosts, then that's fine. We can leave it at that. The old woman who visits me for tea is dead, but I don't have the heart to tell her every time I see my mother there's a pool of seawater in her room. And still no one's removed that boat off the Sumitomo building. If a boat can get all the way up there, what keeps us from disappearing into the sky? Like the woman who walks each morning across the ocean and back, I wonder where I'm going now. What can I talk to my friends about these days? I still have my son who collects the things found on the beach, someone's television set, a rusted refrigerator. A woman says that soon the city will be filled by God, but is God a tsunami that takes years to drain out? The phone calls I get are from numbers that don't exist. My husband calls his friends several times a day. How are you? How are you? Just in case. Otsushi becomes a great washing machine, again tumbling us in and out of memories. It's come to the point I can't even go out in the rain anymore. That's when I see puddles like the eyes of dead people. What can I do? Put them in a cup? My daughters were lined up like bowling pins outside the school, waiting for the earthquake. Why didn't I keep her home from school that day? She complained about her throat. Every day someone new is sick. Whatever we try to build is barricaded by ghosts. Even taxi drivers refuse to go to Sendai, afraid of catching ghosts. One man's address led to the concrete slab. The man was gone, but the driver opened the door. Just in case I was never high enough, I kept climbing the stairs. But how do you outrun an ocean? With all the old houses cleared and the new ones rising, it's becoming hard to remember what we looked like before. So another thing that became interesting with this collection, and I guess with writing any collection, is that you start at one point and you perhaps think it's going to be contained in that. So here I was like, well, I'm interested in 2011 Tohoku disaster and the Fukushima power plant disaster. And like, I really thought it'd be confined to that space, but I found myself really expanding out into mythology and also to other disasters. So I began thinking about Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And so this poem came from that, which is called Adam. How quickly the body unfolds like a paper crane, unremembered like a fish in the silent sea of floating fish. Black rain leaves only a sun's shadow memorialized in a wall. A girl remains is only a name in the stomach of a Nagasaki lunchbox. A woman's body wears glass shards like osteoderms, still carrying the child across a carbon black world. The child holds firmly the woman's hand, even when the maggots come, even as she hungers, even when this nuclear rapture has removed her mother, she holds. This poem is called Okinawa Aquarium. Framed and mounted on the wall, a dolphin's stomach splayed. Inside, plastic bags, bottle caps, condoms broken, Coke bottles, tampons, lighters, dentures, toys, and bubble wands. If God cut me open with a scalpel, what would he find inside me? My beached body heavy with human gospel. Removing each piece from me, God would say, I gave you so many trees to eat from. I might say, I felt so full, even briefly, I thought I was really filled. So I guess the idea of the floating world and the pleasure district and this idea of how we could fill ourselves with brief pleasure, connected with the idea of literal floating, of objects as a result of the tsunami, I became really interested in that idea of how we may try to repair what has been broken, but with something brief. all these objects that had been significant and meaningful in one moment through a disaster could just become debris. So there's quite a few poems in here about cleanup and debris. And that one was inspired by something I'd actually seen in Okinawa, where they had an exhibit where they had literally opened up the stomach of a dolphin to see all of those floating brief objects that had been consumed by the dolphin. So there's a brokenness in how those objects can pollute and destroy our environment. But there's also, simultaneously, there was an interest to me in how nature can prevail despite that. So I was looking through a lot of images of ruins, and I found some of this park in Niigata, Japan, which is very rural. And there were so many pictures of the kutsu and all the green overcoming those ruins. And I became so fascinated in that. So I wrote this poem looking at an abandoned Russian theme park in Niigata, Japan. O God of open windows, God of new ruins, God of all things green, God of 9-year-old festering dog food, God of Russian peasant dancer women, God of many phones, God of outdated computers, God of molded woolly mammoth models, God of broken matryoshka dolls, who even feeds the sparrow. So I know we're getting close to the time. It can fly by when you're reading. You can get so wrapped up in your own poems. But I do want to thank you for tuning in and being with me as I read these poems. So I want to end on one that I think gives a little bit more hope. Something that was really important with these poems was the idea of testimony. And there's this concept of tsunami stones that earlier generations had created these stones of where tsunamis had hit, and they said, don't build your homes below. Actually, a quote from Anayoshi is, remember the calamity of the great tsunamis, do not build any homes below this point. But like our history, we can forget that, and many of these coastal villages had not heeded the tsunami stones. So there was this idea, this urgency in writing these poems of do not forget, don't let us repeat history, let's remember the disaster, and let's learn from the disaster so that this doesn't have to happen again. And so this is a poem that I basically rewrote when the collection was accepted, working with my editor, and we realized the idea of tsunami stones was so important. And so keeping that in mind, I revisited this poem called Town Hall. Watching the town resurrect, I remain unfixed, mouth filled with birds. My eyes are dusty and split down the middle, my bowels washed in mud. A car rests in my intestines, the dog in my chest just delivered puppies. I've been given many names, dangerous, abunai, do not enter, haite wa ikemasen. Tsunami, you may have erased my neighbors, but I still will remain. I defy you, tsunami. I defy you, town. I will always remember should you mistakenly forget. Here I stand, a new tsunami stone. So thank you so much. I'm happy now we're about halfway through, so we've got some time for questions. I welcome you to take a minute and type some questions out in the chat. Oh, thanks so much. Oh, it's so cool seeing all the responses. I've never done reading like this, and this is so surreal. I've watched YouTubers do their Let's Plays of video games and have to simultaneously juggle reading with the chat. But this is so cool seeing people's responses. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Erin, for your kind comment about congrats with the book, and thank you, Courtney, with the title. Thank you for loving that. I really appreciate that. So Erin asks a question of what's your process when writing after poems? How do you decide what to mimic and keep, and where to insert your own voice in the form? That's a really interesting question. So I think when writing the poem, yeah, I word vomit. I want to just get out whatever immediately grabbed me in that moment. And then I let it sit. I think that writing is like wine. It needs to ferment. And I put it aside. And then I think when there's that time, you can reevaluate and be a little bit more discerning about what to mimic, what to keep, what to insert. And with writing these, I guess, especially when you're saying your own voice in the form, a lot of these did take quotes and pieces of other people's experiences. And so there was a sense of having to figure out how I could consume that and be able to write in a way where it felt I could feel that, as opposed to just copying or stealing or anything like that. So I think, again, that sense of fermentation is so important, that we need to be active readers. We need to consume, we need to hear people's stories, and we need to reflect on that and give it time. So I guess I hope that answers your question, but I think in short, it's really about giving it that time, and then kind of the wheat and the chaff kind of fall into place, and you can kind of see, I get a better sense over time of like where it should go from there. Oh, thank you, Courtney, for how quickly the body unfolds like a paper crane. I really appreciate all these kind comments about responding to the reading actively. I wish I could multitask and be able to read that while I was reading. So Annie asks, what have you learned that may have affected your writing or process from your research, and how these natural disasters affect us? Ooh, I like that question. What have you learned that may have affected your writing or process from your research? So I learned so many things from my research. I think one of the biggest things was how powerful stories are and how powerful writing is, because I was not, a lot of people ask about my connection to this experience, and I was not there during the disaster, but I was in Japan shortly afterwards. And in fact, the disaster was something that made a lot of people discourage me from going that year. So in a sense, this was a story that, the story of the disaster is one that I had to read a lot about and see from other eyes. But what's incredible about the act of writing and the act of reading and the act of sharing those stories is that they can become so much a part of us too. I had done so much research and so much writing about this that it haunts me now. The disaster truly haunts me. I won't forget that there was a time we were in theaters and a preview for San Andreas Fault came on, the movie, and there's a scene where there's this flooding of this room, and I froze, and I was about to start sobbing in the middle of the theater, because all I could think was, I felt for a moment as if I was in Higashima, Tsushima, or Izuken, Takata, or one of those cities, and I did not expect that. I did not expect that the act of writing could create something so intimate. And so it really, I think from that, I just really learned that words are powerful and stories are powerful. And it's so important that we take them seriously and that we share. And I think also I learned a lot more about, I guess, with natural disasters, I really started to think about that generational component with the tsunami stones, of how critical it is that we share these stories and that we remember and that we don't forget. Because with the tsunamis, with the natural disasters, there is such a, what's the word? It's a consistent cycle. If you look at the history, so many of those areas have very repeatedly been hit, and we will remember briefly. We all will remember briefly, but then over time we forget about a generation or so, and then we continue to build, and we build closer and closer to the water, and then the water comes back. And so it made me really think about how critical it is that we share those stories about natural disaster, and we educate ourselves, we educate others, to be able to prevent future disasters. So Courtney asks, speaking of hope, how do you find balance within your collection? It sounds like it could have been a heavy collection given the topic. Yes, and I think it is a relatively heavy collection. I don't know if I did the perfect job of balancing, but it is difficult with researching this, with consuming this, really taking in this material. It's grieving. It's very heavy to hear these stories and hear this reality, and how there are still people carrying the effects of these disasters. And it's hard to find hope sometimes. And so I think there were a few ways that I tried to think about how to find hope and how to balance that. I think one way was that I was really inspired by the poet Shuntaro Tanakawa, and he's an amazing Japanese poet. I absolutely recommend you check out his work. And he handles a lot of heavy topics in his work and a lot of grief, but he also has so much playfulness. He's also the translator of the Peanuts comics, which maybe there's a connection there. But he uses magical realism in such a way that really amazed me, that he could talk about death, he could talk about grief, but he would create such a magical world in the process. And I think that that was an aesthetic that really inspired me when writing these poems, is I tried to find a way to process and to give hope and life through that magic realism. I think that that helped give me a little bit more of a balance and I don't want to say an escape. I feel like that's a little problematic, but a way to look at tragedy from a new angle and to kind of recreate and to create something hopeful out of that. I could probably spend a long time on this topic, so I'll leave with that one point, but I love that question. Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for all this. I really appreciate your time coming here and hearing this. I just want to thank Poets in Pajamas so much for having me. Thank you, Anna Black. Thank you, Annie McIntosh, for hosting me and just helping prepare me for this. And I encourage you guys, I'd love to stay in touch. I want to give my social media handles. You can find me on Twitter as Confused Narwhal. You can find me on Facebook on my Meg Eden page. I'd love to continue this conversation. And I also see a couple more questions. We do have a few more minutes, so please feel free to keep asking questions if you have more. So Annie asked, could you link that poet in these comments? Yes, let me do that real quick. Yeah, so Shuntaro Tanakawa is an amazing poet. I had the privilege in my MFA program of being able to do a translation course, which was the coolest thing ever with Michael Collier. And so the whole time we would pick a language to really focus on, really dissecting that and presenting on a poet and several of their pieces. And so I got to do Shuntaro Tanakawa, and it was such an amazing experience. If you have an experience with another language and you haven't explored translating, just from a hobby aside, I am obviously, I am not a professional translator. My Japanese is very rusty, very poor. So I'm by no means a professional with it, but I found the experience really, as a poet, I loved so much grappling with the language on such a visceral level. It was really like digging into the earth with mud through my fingernails and getting to spend that time with Shintaro's work. I just really, really enjoyed that. So I encourage you guys, if you get that experience, to give that a shot. So Courtney asked if who is publishing my book. Thank you for that question. So it's coming out with Press 53 in March. And I'm so excited about that. This book has been, I always send things out prematurely. I get too excited. So I've been sending it around since 2015, but it is now, I think, actually ready. And the editor, Chris Forrest, is amazing. And it's part of their immersion series. So I'm really excited. Chris is going to be writing a foreword to kind of prepare us for the work and to encourage this kind of deeper exploration of learning, educating ourselves about the disaster, educating ourselves about Japanese culture. And so there's going to be some really great notes and resources with it as well. So if you want to dig more into learning about Japanese culture, learning about 311, it will have resources for that too. So real quick, I'm going to, as Courtney requested, I'm going to put the link. Pre-orders just opened, which I'm super excited about. If you pre-order with Press 53, you not only are helping support the press directly as opposed to ordering with Amazon, but you're also going to get the pre-order a month early, which is super, super cool. And I'm really grateful to Press 53 for being able to provide that. And also, I think where I was going with that is that the immersion series is a series that opens up for submissions. I believe it's going to be annually. It's been for the past couple of years a thing, and it's free to submit. So if you are a poet and you have a collection that you believe educates the public on a certain issue or from a certain perspective that isn't really heard, there's kind of that really idea of immersing the readers into a new scenario. I encourage you guys to submit. There's no fee, and I have had such a lovely experience working with Press 53. Well, again, thank you so much, guys, for joining. I don't believe I see any more questions in the thread, but I thank you guys so much for providing questions. It's always a little nerve-wracking doing something digitally, and you're like, is anybody going to read? Is anybody going to participate? But you guys are an amazing audience, and I just appreciate that so much. And again, I'm online at Confused Narwhal on Twitter, and Meg Eden has a Facebook page. I'd love to connect with you guys. I'd love to talk to you more, especially if you have additional questions or just want to talk more about poetry. I'm there, and I'd love to talk to you more. So thanks again, everyone. Have a good night.